Welcome to the GSMC Car Podcast, the show that takes you on a journey to the automotive world. We talk about the latest news, from new makes and models to new technology to all of the must-have options available. Whether you're a fan of the old classics, love the latest models and technology, or have never met a vehicle you didn't want to work on, the GSMC Car Podcast has something for every car enthusiast.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Car Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, David Lucy Mabel. All right, today, folks, we are going to be discussing a trend that has been happening, maybe not the most popular trend, but we are going to be discussing this trend nonetheless that has been happening in the car community, specifically in the luxury car scene. What is this trend, you may be asking about? The trend is these affordable entry-level sedans that have been appearing on the car market from luxury brands that primarily make only luxury cars that are not necessarily affordable to the common person. So I'm talking about your Mercedes-Benz CLA class, your Mercedes-Benz A-Class, your BMW 2 Series, BMW 4 Series, even cars of old like the Cadillac Cimarron, Cadillac Catera, things of that sort. These cars are these cheap, affordable luxury cars, or luxury should be in air quotes, frankly. And they are there for people who, in my opinion, just want the brand name but don't actually know anything about cars, because not surprisingly, they're all ripoffs and there are better alternatives to all of them. So let's get started. In this podcast, we are going to be talking about basically the cheap luxury cars. Are they a good thing? Not really. Why are brands making cheap luxury cars? We are going to have a specific example of a cheap luxury car versus a premium car from a mainstream brand, how the premium car from the mainstream brand is almost always the better value. And in the last segment, we are going to be discussing my verdict, and we're going to be discussing some of the 5 cars that, from old and from new, that are main offenders as far as this category goes. So why don't we get started? Just to really drive my point home, to be clear, I'm not talking about affordable luxury cars from brands that have always been made to produce affordable luxury cars. So I'm not talking about Buick, because Buick has always been the premium brand of GM and Cadillac has always been the luxury brand. So I'm not talking about Buick, oh, Buicks are just rebadged Cadillacs, are just cheaper, blah, blah, blah. No. Buick has an identity of its own, and Buick has always been the cheaper luxury car that has been offered by GM. When Oldsmobile was around, that was always the same thing as well. So you had the 3 luxury brands. You had Oldsmobile, which was lower than Buick. You had Buick, which was lower than Cadillac and GM. I'm not talking about those two. I'm not talking about Acura, because Acuras are luxury, but they're cheaper than your average luxury sedan. I'm not talking about Infiniti even. Lexus, because Lexus has moved up past this category. I guess I could have spoken about Lexus, but I have no gripes about Lexus. My main gripes are the German car companies. The German car companies that have always been seen as high luxury here in America. Of course, over in Germany, they produce all sorts of different types of cars. I mean, they produce the A-Class over in Europe for ages now as a small economy car. But I'm talking about their presence here in the United States. How, frankly, it's almost insulting to the brand to produce something that is as cheap as the A-Class when you have an S-Class on your same floor in your showroom. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. And I'm going to explain to you why. Cheap luxury cars from luxury brands tend to cheapen the brand image as a whole. Just like I said earlier, nobody looks cool driving a Mercedes-Benz A-Class. You know what you look like when you're driving a Mercedes-Benz A-Class? And this is my opinion, but I would find that people who are fans of luxury cars might agree. You look like someone who doesn't know how to spend your money, first of all. And second of all, you look like someone who is obsessed with brand imagery. I mean, it's embarrassing. It really is. Because for $30-something thousand, and later on in the podcast, you'll see me really break it down, the comparison between this and another car that's always been known as an entry-level luxury car. You will see that the breakdown never makes any sense when you're going to be buying a cheap Mercedes-Benz from the factory, or you could be buying an expensive car from a mainstream brand, and you will realize that the value is almost always better when you go with the luxury car from the mainstream brand instead of going from the cheap car from the luxury brand. It's just, at that point, it's a mark of hubris. It's like, oh, well, I drive a Mercedes-Benz. Oh, well, do you drive an E-Class or an S-Class? No, I drive an A-Class. I was like, okay, you don't even drive a real Mercedes-Benz. Okay, fine. I mean, yeah, it has the Mercedes-Benz logo on it, but, you know, the thing is, it's as if though you're trying to prove a point when you can't actually try to prove it. Like, if you have Mercedes-Benz level money, you're not going to be spending it on an A-Class or a CLA. You are going to be buying an E-Class or an S-Class or a C-Class at the least. I mean, that's how it used to be until recently Mercedes-Benz started producing all these cheap models that are affordable, and, you know, it's cheapening the brand image. And Mercedes-Benz is not the only one that is innocent here. I mean, you have the BMW 2 and 4 Series, which, granted, those are coupes. So coupes, you know, they have a category onto their own. It's not like anybody's buying this coupe as their first car. So the coupe is more of a sporty version, but even those, I mean, they're not M coupes, they're just regular old coupes. I mean, they even kind of cheapen the brand image a little bit. And then you've got the Audi A3. A long time ago, the lowest Audi used to be the A4, then you went up to the A6, and then you went up to the A8. But now, you know, they've got the A3 in there, and like, where does it fit? Like, if it's below the A4, but the A4 has always been the cheapest Audi. So, like, there's that. And then they even have in some of the performance luxury brands that they're coming out with, like, slow versions of the Cadillac, you know, V cars, like the Cadillac CT5V. I just saw this in Doug DeMuro's most recent video. It's like the Cadillac CTSV that came before had like 600-something horsepower and was an actual real performance monster. And then now you have the Cadillac CT5V, which is like a detuned version of that. It's got like half the horsepower, and it's also cheaper. Like, why? Like, people who have V car money aren't going to be spending it on a cheap V car that has half the power of the one that came before it. They're going to be spending it on a real V car. I mean, you could have the regular CT5 have 300 horsepower, but it's not deserving of a V brand, because when you go from Cadillac CTS-V, 600 horsepower, Blackwing V8, 200 miles per hour, fastest Cadillac ever produced, and then you go from that to CT5V, which is basically your regular everyday luxury sedan. I mean, like, why put the V badge on it? You know why they're putting the V badge on it? So for the people who don't have real V car money, for them to brag and say, well, I got a V car. Listen, buddy, you didn't get a V car. You got a car that happened to have a V badge on it because Cadillac's trying to dupe you. Well, it's the same thing with the Mercedes-Benz A-Class, the BMW 2 Series, the Audi A3, and frankly, any Maserati Maserati that's on the road today. Because years ago, Maserati used to be rare, used to be special, used to be like limited numbers, high value, high performance, other sorts of that thing. Now you can get a lease deal on a Maserati Levante crossover SUV that your regular suburban soccer mom who's making a bit of money can buy. I mean, it's insulting. It really is. It's insulting to the brands, and it's insulting to the people who buy it, because the people who buy those cars are like, oh, well, I have a Maserati, or I have a Cadillac. No, you don't. No, you don't. Quit kidding yourself. You have what they want you to believe is a Maserati, what they want you to believe is a Cadillac. Cadillac, the Cadillac Cimarron, and the Cadillac Catera. Cadillac Cimarron was a rebadged Chevy Cavalier, and the Cadillac Cimarron was like an Opel Omega from Germany. I mean, they're not real cars. They're not really belonging to that brand. They're literally just for the people who want to, make themselves look better. So, affordable cars from luxury brands tend to be purchased by people who are trying to keep up appearances. Like I've just said about only trying to keep up appearances. It's like, why buy a Mercedes-Benz A-Class when you can buy a Toyota Avalon? Let me just drive this point home. A brand new A-Class is $32,800. A brand new Toyota Avalon is $35,875. So, we're looking at the cheapest Mercedes-Benz that you could possibly buy here in the United States, and we're looking at the most expensive Toyota car you can buy here in the United States. Which one is a better value? Well, you will find that the Toyota Avalon is larger, it's more safe, it offers better performance than a base A-Class, and it's more practical in every single respect. So why buy the cheap luxury car just to keep up appearances, just for the badge, when you could buy the premium mainstream car and then have more bang for your buck? You're getting a full-size sedan versus a subcompact for only $3,000 more, plus more performance, plus more features, plus everything. I would commend someone for spending $35,000 on a Toyota Avalon touring model, and I would make fun of someone who spent $35,000 on a Mercedes-Benz A-Class. You know why? Because you don't know how to spend your money. You're just trying to keep up appearances. This is not the same phenomenon as the people who buy depreciated luxury cars. Be wary. It's not the same phenomenon. People who buy depreciated luxury cars are one of two things. They're either crazy or they know how to spend their money. Now, I'm going to tell you why. Because people who buy depreciated luxury cars know that they will get a good deal on a car that used to be that much money. Now, the people who buy depreciated luxury cars can be crazy, as in they buy depreciated luxury cars like depreciated S-Classes or depreciated 7 Series, and then they don't have the money to take care of them because they didn't have the money to buy them new. Or they're either really smart and they know how to spend their money if they buy them and then they know that they have the money to buy it new, but they buy them used, and then they put the money in to keep those cars on the road. So you could either be rich and buy a used luxury car and spend the money that you would have spent when it was new to keep it on the road, or you could be crazy and buy a cheap luxury car and thinking that it's going to last you if you're going to treat it like a Toyota Camry, where you're not going to treat it properly. So it's not the same phenomenon, however. That's a different phenomenon than the people who have the money to buy a proper car, but it may not be money like $50,000, $60,000 to buy a regular Mercedes-Benz or like a real Mercedes-Benz. They go and buy the cheaper Mercedes-Benz. Those people who have new car money but not new luxury car money, that go and buy cheap luxury cars just to prove a point, those are the people that I'm talking to. Those people are not smart. They're not smart. They don't know how to spend their money, and they're trying to keep up appearances. And Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Cadillac, Lexus, Audi, Jaguar, all of them, all of those high luxury brands that we speak of, those are the ones who know that type of demographic, and they are coming out with the cheap cars so they can cater to that demographic because they know how vain these people actually are. If you're going to buy a luxury car from a luxury brand, go big or go home. If you're going to buy a Mercedes-Benz and you got money to buy a brand new car, goodness, buy an E-Class or an S-Class, maybe a C-Class if you don't need a car that large or fancy. Don't go buying a CLA or an A-Class, especially if this is like your daughter's first car or something. She doesn't need that. She doesn't need that. You're just trying to keep up appearances. I mean, I saw when I was in high school a girl with a brand new Mercedes-Benz CLA. And of course, I was none the wiser at the time. I was like, ooh, this girl drives a Mercedes-Benz. Only to find out that my beat-up Cadillac had more features than that thing. So, I mean, you know, just putting it out there. But anyway, please stay tuned for the next segment in which I'm going to be talking about why the luxury brands are making cheap cars. And if you stay tuned till the very end, you'll get to hear my verdict and some of the cars that are the most grievous out there as far as being cheap cars from luxury brands. So please stay tuned.
Are you a business owner? Someone interested in the latest news that might affect your business? Then check out the GSMC Business News Podcast, a show dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning business, technology, and the stock market. Get a head start on the day as we keep you updated on the latest goings-on Wall Street, money, jobs, and technology. The GSMC Business News Podcast has you covered.
All right, welcome back, car people. So, in the last segment, you heard me kind of rant about the cheap cars from the luxury brands, how this has become a sort of a problem in the car world, if I could put it that way. I don't know if it's a problem, a trend that I don't like. It's something that's happening. But in this segment, we are going to be exploring the why. Why are these brands doing things like that? Especially nowadays, because in days of old, they didn't used to do things like that. So let's get started. Okay, so the obvious out there that I just want to put it makes the money go round. It's money. They're doing it for money reasons. If they stay making unaffordable cars, then the company won't make nearly as much as the others that produce affordable cars. So, in an attempt to attract a less wealthy demographic that is obsessed with brand name, companies like Mercedes-Benz, Maserati, and others, including Cadillac at some point, make cheap cars and try to pass them off as luxury. So, let me put it that way. You will find that the largest, most profitable car companies on earth don't only make luxury cars. They've got mainstream brands too. So for example, GM is one of the largest car companies on earth. GM is the largest American car company on earth. You will find that currently GM makes Cadillac, Buick, Cadillac, Buick, GMC, Chevy. In Europe, they make Opel, if I'm not mistaken, and they haven't sold Opel off. And they make Vauxhall, and in Australia, they make Holden. Those are the GM car companies. You will find that Cadillac and Buick are at the top of the lineup. Cadillac here in North America, Buick overseas in China are the top of the GM lineup. All right. So, GM is a large, very profitable company, right? Okay, well, all their other cars that aren't Cadillacs or Buick are mainstream cars. Some are nicer than others, but they are mainstream cars. So you see, they've got mainstream brands that can sell to the masses to bring in the money for cars like Buick and Cadillac. So the Buicks and Cadillacs don't have to sink down to the level of offering, super cheap cars. So because they already have super cheap cars somewhere else in the company. And not saying that Buick and Cadillac are, not offering affordable vehicles, because we have to think, if we go back to the luxury car podcast that I made several weeks ago, you will find that they are not in the same level as Mercedes-Benz, Jaguar, Audi, BMW. They're not in the same level. So they're actually going to be more affordable anyway. But they are not going out of their way to make a car that is cheaper than normal for their brand to attract other people, because they don't need to. Well, when you have groups like, I'm going to leave the Volkswagen group out of this because they seem to be the exception to this rule, but when you have groups like Mercedes-Benz and BMW, on the other hand, who don't have mainstream brands, Mercedes-Benz and BMW are the only ones in their companies, so they don't have mainstream brands to sell to the masses to bring in the money for the luxury car brand. So you know what they do? They take the luxury car brand and they cheapen it. They cheapen it to try to get people to buy it so they can dip in to the people who would have bought luxury mainstream cars. They're trying to get them to buy cheap luxury cars. And that's where the sweet spot kind of lies, because they're going to get the people who don't know, or who maybe don't want a Toyota Avalon Touring, or a Ford Taurus Platinum, or any of the mainstream full-size luxury or full-size semi-luxury sedans from the other car companies. They're going to get those people who don't want that, or who don't know that you can option it up that much. They're going to get those same people to buy Mercedes-Benz A-Class, Mercedes-Benz CLA Class, BMW 2 Series, BMW 4 Series, Audi A3, so on and so forth. They're going to get those people who want, I can get a Mercedes-Benz for this type of money. I can get a BMW for this type of money. I can get an Audi for this type of money. Why am I going to go get a Toyota? The reason why you're going to want to get a Toyota is because when the Toyota breaks, it's going to be cheaper, and the Toyota is a better value all around. You won't be able to afford to fix that Mercedes-Benz when it breaks, because you could barely afford to buy a Mercedes-Benz in the first place. So you see, that's the problem. But these people who are in charge of these car companies know this. So the luxury brands that don't have mainstream brands, they are going to be the ones that are going to market these cheap little luxury cars, luxury in air quotes once again. They're the ones that are going to market these to the people who don't know what they can get, and then that's how they're going to dip in to the profits of the more mainstream brands that actually have affordable cars. So they're doing this in an attempt to keep them afloat. It's almost the same reason why those mainstream brands offer luxury cars, or at least semi-luxury cars, or they offer cars that can be upgraded to luxury cars. It's because they're trying to make as much money as possible. And they're trying to cater to a demographic that they originally would not have catered to. But you see, it makes sense. And it makes sense the way they do it. Because when you see Toyota, when Toyota wanted to start making more money, they made Lexus. Lexus was their luxury brand. So now, because it's a Lexus, they can charge more money. And that works because it's never going to be as expensive as a Mercedes-Benz S-Class. It's never going to be as expensive as a Mercedes-Benz because it's a Lexus. They know where to price their luxury cars. Nissan did the same thing with Infiniti. Honda did the same thing with Acura. The Japanese companies seem to have gotten it right. Instead of offering cheap cars from luxury brands, they all started off as cheap mainstream brands, and they started offering luxury cars to justify charging more money because it's now a luxury car. And they know to keep it below the German rivals, who have always been the kingpins in the luxury car market since after like the 1970s, when the American car, luxury cars started going downhill. They've been the kingpins. They offered them as an alternative to the German cars. That works. The German cars, however, haven't gotten it in their brains yet that, look, you can't really sell a cheap Mercedes-Benz and expecting it to be successful. I mean, of course, I'm not going to bring out sales numbers, but it is my observation that you see a lot more Lexus, you see a lot more Cadillac, you see a lot more Toyota Avalon, you see a lot more premium cars from cheaper brands than you see the cheap cars from the premium brands. Because people, at least for the most part, are smart enough not to, except for a select few of the population that are obsessed with brand image that are going to go and spend their money on something unnecessary like that. So if I were all of them, what I would do basically what Cadillac did back in the 1930s. To offer cheaper Cadillacs, they made LaSalle. LaSalle was not Cadillac. LaSalle was a cheaper alternative to Cadillac. They were like baby Cadillacs. So Mercedes-Benz could make a baby brand that it can sell its cheaper cars under. Same thing with BMW. And I guess Audi, it should be Volkswagen, but they're not doing that. So maybe Audi needs to make one that's between Volkswagen and Audi too. However, that's not going to happen because it costs a lot of money to create a whole new brand. Only to find out that the whole new brand that you're going to be making, it's not higher than the brand you already have. It's below the brand you already have. So it makes more sense. It makes more sense to offer a cheaper car under that brand than it does to have a cheaper brand. Because the same thing that what happened to LaSalle is the fact that people were paying near Cadillac money, but they weren't getting the Cadillac badge. So they were like, I'm not buying a LaSalle. I can spend the money or I can save a bit more money to buy a Cadillac instead of buying a LaSalle. LaSalle just shows that I cheaped out. And that's the problem. Why luxury car companies, even though it would be smarter for them, at least on paper, to make a baby brand to complement their luxury brand, it never works. And history has shown that it's never worked because LaSalle went under after less than 20 years because people didn't want to pay near Cadillac money to buy a almost Cadillac when they could have just saved a bit more money and bought a real Cadillac. LaSalle was worse than buying a cheap Cadillac because LaSalle is the cheap Cadillac and it just shows that you cheaped out. So that's the issue here. You have luxury car brands that are cheapening their images to offer mainstream affordable cars, but the fact that they're cheapening their image is because they haven't offered a new brand. But if they offer a new brand, then people are feeling like they cheaped out, so they're not going to do that. So they have to offer a cheap car that's going to cheapen their brand image just so people can buy it. So it's like to make the people feel richer, they're making their brand poorer instead of keeping their brand rich and creating a poorer brand for the people who are actually poorer, because you don't want to make the people feel poor. You just want to make them feel rich. So you're offering a poorer product from your rich brand. That's basically what it is if you can wrap your head around that. So because of the perception that a Mercedes-Benz has, people are going to spend $40,000 for a subcompact piece of crap cheap Mercedes-Benz because it's a Mercedes-Benz. If they were to change the brand name and make it a baby Mercedes-Benz, people aren't going to be dishing out $40,000 for a baby Mercedes-Benz when they know they could dish out $45,000 for a real Mercedes-Benz. And in the latter scenario, Mercedes-Benz would still stay as being exclusive, but the baby brand would never sell because people would always be like, I cheaped out. They would feel bad. Now, however, on the flip side of that, with what's going on, now you're cheapening the brand image as a whole, because now Mercedes-Benz seems attainable. Mercedes-Benz never seemed attainable, which is not good for the exclusivity of the brand. There was a time that unless you were rich in America, you could not afford a Mercedes-Benz. Now, you have high schoolers driving brand new Mercedes-Benz because they're making cheap cars. So now you're diminishing the exclusivity of the brand only to make the populace feel as if though it is richer when in reality it is not. So it's a fine balance to walk here. How much do you want to cheapen your brand image? But how much money do you want to make? The more you cheapen your brand image, the more money you make. Or if you keep your brand image pure and not cheap and still exclusive, and then you make a cheaper brand image, you're not going to make the money you spend making that cheaper brand image, because people are not going to want it when they know that there is a more expensive alternative that they can spend a bit more money to get. So here you have it. It's like, let me put it in concrete terms. Long time ago, the C-Class used to be the cheapest Mercedes-Benz you can buy here in the United States. The C-Class. Okay. Now, you have the CLA, you have the A-Class. Let's say Mercedes-Benz were to create a baby brand where you can get an A-Class for the same money that you can get it, a CLA class for the same money that you can get it now. However, knowing that the C-Class is only a bit more expensive, you're not going to want the baby A-Class or the baby CLA class because it's not a Mercedes-Benz. It's a baby Mercedes-Benz. It's a cheap Mercedes-Benz. You're going to save your money and buy a C-Class because it's a real Mercedes-Benz. That now you see the problem. But then if you extend the umbrella of Mercedes-Benz to include the cheaper ones, it has the badge, so people are going to be spending it on those cars. Now, you will find that the people who buy these cars will never actually get to the point of buying a brand new S-Class. Because if those people had that money to begin with, they would have already done that. So I've heard it rationalized in the past that the reason why car companies do this is to create some sort of brand loyalty. For example, well, if we offer this cheap Mercedes-Benz for someone who is not as rich, then maybe when they get rich someday, they're going to buy an E-Class or an S-Class. No, that's not going to work. It's not going to work. Sorry, I slipped into an accent trying to mock those people there. But it's not going to work because those people, if they were rich enough, they would not be buying the cheap Mercedes-Benz. They would be buying the richer, the bigger ones. And that type of mentality is not the type of mentality you want people going for. Because let me break it down. They're like, oh, well, they're going to one day buy an S-Class. No. If you have enough money to buy a brand new car and you go and spend it on a cheap Mercedes-Benz, you're never going to have enough money to go buy a real Mercedes-Benz when you have it. Because you have the money to buy a new car and you're going to be buying based on brand image, not value. The people who buy based on brand image, not value, are not the people who are going to one day be able to buy a brand new S-Class. Those are the type of people who like, oh, well, I've got enough money and this is the most money I'm going to make, so I'm going to buy myself a Mercedes-Benz and make myself feel good. Those are not the people who are going to cheap out, be frugal until they have enough money to buy an S-Class. That's not the mentality that you want. So that actually doesn't work. That actually doesn't work. The people who are going to buy an S-Class are the people who are rich from the beginning. There's not the people who are concerned with brand image. Those are the people who are concerned with quality and the reason why they buy an S-Class, not because it's a Mercedes-Benz. They buy an S-Class because it's an S-Class and they know what an S-Class stands for. The people who go and buy this CLA class or the A-Class are the people who've been busting their tails and who have gotten to the point where they finally have enough money to buy a brand new car. And in order to make themselves feel better about themselves, they're going to go buy a Mercedes-Benz A-Class just to say that they've worked hard enough to drive a Mercedes-Benz, when in reality, the Mercedes-Benz is nothing special, and the neighbor next door who made the smart decision and bought a Toyota Avalon Touring actually has a better car than they do. But they're not going to say that because, well, I've got a Mercedes-Benz, so therefore my car must be better because it's more expensive. Not really. But anyway, moving on. Now we can get on to segment 3 after the break when we talk about a specific example of this, and I'll actually break it down and offer you the numbers themselves. So please stay tuned after the break.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Alrighty then, welcome back, folks. So in the last segment, you just heard me try to rationalize why car companies do this in the first place, offering cheap luxury brand cars instead of more expensive mainstream brand cars, and why people actually fall for the ploy and why people are actually buying them. So now in segment 3, we're going to look at a specific example, and you've heard me allude to this in the past segments. We're going to be talking about a specific example from a cheap luxury car versus a premium car from a mainstream brand. So we are going to take the example off the Mercedes-Benz A-Class versus the Toyota Avalon. And once again, I'm not just picking on the Mercedes-Benz A-Class, but this seems to be the biggest offender in the car market right now as far as cheap luxury cars go. Cheap cars from luxury brands, if I could put it that way. So the Mercedes-Benz A-Class, here are the specs, here are the pricings, here's all the information you need to know about it if you're going to be buying it. Okay, so it starts out at $32,800, which, when you look at it, the average price of a brand new car in the United States is right around this point anyway. So that's the starting MSRP. That's for the A220 two-wheel drive version, the very base model with front-wheel drive. The AMG A35 sedan with all-wheel drive is $44,950. So that's the top of the line. That's the most you can option this before you have to move up in the lineup. The base model has 188 horsepower, and the AMG model has 302 horsepower. So we're not looking at something that's terribly bad as far as the performer goes. But in order for you to get the real performance, you have to go up to the AMG model. So if you're getting the A-Class, you're getting a laughable 188 horsepower. Which granted, a car of this size, subcompact, 188 horsepower ain't that bad. But considering what else you can get for the money, you're getting a laughable 188 horsepower. My Buick Park Avenue from 2004 has 240 horsepower. So this is a slow Mercedes-Benz. Anyway, moving on. Lest I go on a rant again. The miles per gallon for the base model is 24 city, 35 highway. And if you're going for the AMG model, it's going to be 24 city and 31 highway. And safety. You've got active braking assist, blind spot assist, active steering assist, and of course, you're going to have your backup camera because that's been mandated on new cars being sold in the North American market since 2018. So you're obviously going to have a backup camera, and you're going to have seatbelts and other, obvious safety features as far as that goes. Performance. You get 4 cylinders, front-wheel drive, 7-speed automatic transmission, 188 horsepower at 5,800 RPM, and 221 pound-feet of torque at 1,250 RPM. And in other, amenities and whatnot, you get a 6-speaker stereo system. Okay, that's not that bad. On paper, it sounds great. That sounds like a well-equipped car for its size class, for its price point. However, when you're thinking of what else you can get for that money, then if you gone out and buy one of these, you might shoot yourself in the foot because you're going to realize what you just wasted your money on. For example, Toyota Avalon from 2020. Now, the Toyota Avalon, just a brief history of the Toyota Avalon. Toyota Avalon has been Toyota's full-size sedan in the North American market since the demise of the Cressida back in the, I believe, late 1980s, early 1990s. They've been making the Avalon since 93. And the Avalon has long been hailed as the Japanese Buick. For example, the Avalon used to come with a bench seat, just like the American cars used to come with. The Avalon has always been your nicer Toyota that wasn't a Lexus. It was that in between, you know, the Camry and like the Lexus that you could get. The Avalon has always been the people who want luxury, but who don't want something as ostentatious as a Lexus. It's kind of like people who want luxury, but didn't want such a big brand like Cadillac got Buick. People who wanted luxury, but didn't want Lexus got the Avalon. The Avalon used to compete against Cadillac DTS, Buick Lucerne, things of that sort. American, you know, it's like this American-esque large car. Now, the Avalon nowadays has gotten more of a sporty look, but it hasn't lost its premium car characteristics. So now, knowing that the Avalon has always been a premium car with luxury features and basically a near luxury car, let's see what it offers compared to the quote-unquote luxury car from the luxury brand, the Mercedes-Benz A-Class. So the Toyota Avalon starts out at $35,875. So it's about $3,000 more expensive than the base A-Class. And this is a base Avalon we're talking about. The touring model is $42,575. So the touring model is about $2,000 cheaper than the A35 AMG. All models come with a 301 horsepower V6, providing power to the front wheels. It has an 8-speed automatic transmission. Comes with a hybrid version, which the A-Class does not come with, at least if it does, not yet. Safety, it has a pre-collision system, lane departure with steering assist, intelligence clearance sonar, which basically is it senses the car in front of you and then applies brakes if you're getting too close. But it's not the same one as the pre-collision system, which applies the brakes if you're going to crash to mitigate the crash. Performance. It's front-wheel drive. All-wheel drive is not available. The Mercedes-Benz A-Class has all-wheel drive as an option. It has a V6 engine, 301 horsepower at 6,600 RPM, 25 miles per gallon combined, so 22 city and 31 highway. So when you really think of it, it's just right around the same mark as the Mercedes-Benz S-Class, not S-Class, A-Class, which is a much smaller vehicle. So the fact that the Toyota Avalon can get this large and still deliver somewhat similar numbers as far as fuel efficiency goes is actually rather impressive. It takes regular fuel, not premium fuel like all the Mercedes-Benz. It has 267 pound-feet of torque at 4,700 RPM, so it's more powerful and it pulls better than the A-Class. And it got a 16-speaker stereo system, 16-speaker sound system in this automobile. Okay, folks, you've seen the numbers, you've heard the numbers. Why would anybody go and buy the anemic A-Class because of the brand image when you can get yourself a proper Toyota Avalon, top of the line level, for the same money that you can get a Mercedes-Benz A-Class, which is the bottom of the barrel Mercedes-Benz? It doesn't make any sense. And the reason why it doesn't make any sense is because it's not meant to make any sense. The people who actually know how to spend money, the people who know where to spend their money, are not going to be the people who are going to be buying a Mercedes-Benz A-Class just because it has the Mercedes-Benz logo on it. If you really want to treat your high schooler to a proper car their first year, and you've got enough money because you're some rich, bougie family from Southwest Florida, you're not going to be buying them an anemic Mercedes-Benz A-Class that can barely get out of its own way. you are going to be buying them a proper car like a Toyota Avalon Touring or a Toyota Avalon TRD as their first car. And here's what it is. You will find that, and I'm going back to my high school days, you will find that the kids in the parking lot that had the Nissan Maximas, the fully loaded Nissan Maximas. My friend Taylor Wilson had one. She had a fully loaded Nissan Maxima with leather seats and a Bose stereo sound system and everything. Granted, it was old, but this was a nice car. You had kids with Toyota Avalons. You had me with a Cadillac DeVille. And then you had the kids with the Mercedes-Benz CLAs and the BMW 3 Series. You will find that actually us with the Nissan Maximas, the Toyota Avalons, the Cadillac DeVilles, the cheaper luxury cars, we actually had nicer cars than all of them. Our cars were not only nicer, they were faster, they were more reliable because they weren't pumped full of some unnecessary technology like these European brands were. But you find that the people who did that are the people who were so concerned with brand image that they wanted their daughter to have a Mercedes-Benz. They wanted their daughter to have a BMW because we're rich and we can afford that. But you're rich, but you have a poor person mentality. You're rich and you want, the most expensive thing just to show off how rich you are. You will find that the richest people don't ever buy the richest things to show off how rich they are because they're not insecure in their wealth. And this is really the heart of the issue here. If you can look at these numbers and objectively say that you're still going to buy the A-Class, it's either a matter of preference, which, I mean, some people just prefer that, or it's a matter of hubris and you are insecure in your wealth, so you want to make it seem as if though you are richer than you actually are. I've seen people like this all the time. The people who buy the most expensive shoes, who buy the most expensive clothes, even though they know they can't actually afford them, they have to spend an entire paycheck on one, are the people who want to come off as richer than they actually are. If you are super rich and you actually have that money, the reason why you got super rich is because you were smart with your money, not because you were stupid with your money. So if you want to be smart with your money and then get rich one day to the point where you can actually buy a Mercedes-Benz, you can't be spending every last dime on something that's not worth it. You're going to spend your money where it is worth it. You will find that people who are more rich in their mentality, the people who are more frugal in their money spending, the people who are just smarter all around when it comes to money things, are not going to be buying a Mercedes-Benz A-Class. They are going to be buying a Toyota Avalon because they know they can get more bang for their buck, and they know where they spent their money, they spent it well. Of course, there is lots of examples out there. I just had to take the most obvious examples. The most obvious example of a premium car from a mainstream brand and the most obvious example of a cheap car from a luxury brand. But this doesn't just apply to cars. It applies to trucks. It applies to SUVs. It applies to any modern automobile on the market today. How so many of them are coming from the luxury brands that are offering cheap models instead of the mainstream brands that are offering premium models. It makes a difference. It makes a difference. It's like, why go and buy a Cadillac Escalade when you can buy a GMC Yukon Denali? Granted, those are made by the same company, but it's that same sort of mentality. Why buy a Lincoln Navigator when you can buy a Ford Expedition Platinum version? Why buy a Lincoln, MKS when you could buy a Ford Taurus Touring Edition? I mean, it's the same process. It's the same thought process. Why go and spend extra for the brand image when you could just do the same exact thing but get a cheaper car? It's like my friend Maggie from Hallmark a long time ago bought herself a Ford Fusion Platinum Edition instead of going to buy the Lincoln MKZ because it was the same car built on the same platform, offering all the same luxury features except it didn't have a Lincoln badge on it. And that's her rationale. She's like, well, I didn't need to buy the Lincoln when I could just buy this car that's cheaper and offers everything the Lincoln does. So there you have it. We are going to be moving on to segment 4 right after the break. So please stay tuned. And segment 4, you are going to be hearing my verdict, and you are going to be hearing some of the biggest offenders in the car market today as far as cheap cars from luxury brands. So please stay tuned.
Do you work in the world of marketing and advertising? Are you a media buyer or the owner of an agency? Have you been looking for a podcast to help stay on top of all the goings-on of those worlds? The GSMC Marketing News Podcast is dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning marketing and advertising. Get the latest marketing news, from what major businesses have planned for the coming year, to the newest trends in advertising, from podcasts, digital and streaming, to the old standbys of radio, television, and billboards. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast has you covered, whether you're a marketing agent or a business trying to expand your brand.
All right. Welcome to segment 4, folks, and thank you for staying this far into the podcast. This is where I can talk. So basically, I'm going to echo what I said in the last segment, and I'm going to add on a bit more to it. So we discussed in the last segment the Mercedes-Benz A-Class versus the Toyota Avalon. That's just an example of what's been going on in the car market and other things in the car market that have been, contributing to that sort of comparison there. So you can do the same thing with, I guess, your Honda Accord. Maybe not the Honda Accord. Maybe your Chevy Impala LTZ versus your Cadillac ATS or something like that. You can do the same sort of comparison with any cheap car from a luxury brand or premium car from a mainstream brand. So it's what I'm trying to get at is the fact that it's not just those two cars that are, grievous in that category. You've got other cars that are doing the same exact foolishness, that are doing the same exact sort of thing, but it just happens to be boiled down to those two. So don't get me as quoting as this Mercedes-Benz is the only one doing this and Toyota is the only one doing that. There are plenty of other examples out there. Maybe none so as stark as that, but there are plenty of other examples out there. So basically what I was trying to say is that after you've seen the number, the Toyota Avalon is objectively a better car than the Mercedes-Benz A-Class. The Toyota Avalon is objectively a better car than, frankly, a lot of those cheap luxury cars you're buying from the German brands, because they know exactly what they're doing. They're just trying to lure you in because you've got the brand image. So cheap luxury cars are never worth it. Better off buying a top trim car of a mainstream company than buying a cheap bottom of the barrel car from a luxury car company. As seen as the previous example, the cars like the Toyota Avalon are objectively a better alternative to the A-Class. The A-Class is basically just a badge. That's it. That's all you're paying for. You're paying for just the badge when you're getting the cheap luxury cars. And some of the most grievous models out there, we're going to be taking it back for a little bit of history because we're going to be talking about the Cadillac Cimarron. The Cadillac Cimarron seems to be one of the most famous examples of this in the car world. And the reason why it's the most famous, or I really should say infamous, is because it was so badly executed. And man, I wish you all could see my face when I say badly. It was laughably bad. It was embarrassingly bad. The Cadillac Cimarron was a car that was built on the thinly disguised bones of the Chevy Cavalier of the same period. Cadillac wanted a cheaper car to combat the imports. So what it did, it took The Chevy Cavalier that was offered in the same market. It's not like it took the Chevy Cavalier from somewhere that, Americans had never recognized it. It took a Chevy Cavalier from the same market that they were going to try to sell the Cimarron, and they gussied it up, slapped some leather, put a Cadillac badge on the front, and be like, okay, Cadillac, and I'm going to charge you twice as much. Oh my goodness. I mean, if they had been smart, at least, they would have taken the car from some far-off land that people in America would have never heard about, and they would have slapped on a Cadillac badge and be like, hey, this is the Cadillac. People would have more likely fallen for it than pulling the wool over people's eyes and being like a cheap magician and then pulling the fast one and then pulling a bunny out of the hat, but you totally didn't see me just put the bunny in right before the show. It's like, oh, you totally didn't see me just transform a Chevy Cavalier because this is a Cadillac. It's got a Cadillac badge. It's Cimarron by Cadillac, blah, blah, blah. No, it's not. No, it's not. It's a Chevy Cavalier with leather seats. That's what the Cadillac Cimarron was. And it was embarrassing. It was horribly embarrassing. But, there were people who bought it. And you know why there were people who bought it? It's the same reason why people buy A-classes today. Is because they saw Cadillac, they knew they would never actually be able to afford a real Cadillac, so they bought the cheapest Cadillac they could possibly get their grimy hands on. Because they ain't smart, they don't know how to spend their money. So they go and buy a Cimarron by Cadillac instead of buying an actual Cadillac. And how did it play out for them? Cars were terrible. You could have bought a better alternative from another brand. You could have bought a Toyota Cressida, but you went and you bought a Cadillac Cimarron. Now, what are you paying for? You're paying for a Chevy Cavalier with leather seats. That's what the Cadillac Cimarron was. Moving on. You had the Cadillac Catera. Cadillac Catera, at least, was a bit smarter move on Cadillac's part. Again, trying to combat rivals, trying to combat imports, trying to get a cheaper car to bring in a younger crowd. So you know what GM did? They took the Opel Omega or the Opel Vectra, one of the Opels from Germany. They brought it to America, slapped on some leather seats and a Cadillac badge and called it a Cadillac. Now, the Catera was actually was a hilarious attempt. I'm going to tell you why it was hilarious. Even a bit more hilarious than the Cimarron. At least the Cimarron, if you squinted hard enough, kind of looked like a Cadillac, because all the Cadillacs of those days were boxy, and the Cimarron was boxy too. That was car design. Now, the Catera, on the other hand, you're trying to make it fit in with the likes of the DeVille and the Seville, which were the full-size sedans from Cadillac. You had the DeVille, which was the top of the line full-size, and then you had the Seville, which occupied the mid-size market, but was still a full-size sedan nonetheless. And you're trying to get the Cadillac to fit into one of those, or to fit in with one of those. That was a laughable attempt because the Catera didn't even look like a Cadillac. The Cimarron, on the other hand, if you squinted hard enough, yeah, you could have seen it. It fit in with the Cadillacs. It fit in with the Eldorado and the DeVille and the Seville and the Brougham of that and the Fleetwood of that time period because it was boxy just like all of them. But you get the Catera doesn't even look like a Cadillac, and they were trying to pass it off as a Cadillac. You knew from the very beginning that there was something fishy about this. This was a counterfeit Cadillac. This wasn't real. And as you did your research, or especially if you came from Europe and you actually saw the Cadillac Catera in Europe, which was like the Opel Omega or the Opel Vectra or some foolishness as that, you actually saw it. And you came to America and be like, oh, this is a Cadillac? Well, over there in Europe, they're cheaper and they're not Cadillacs. They're this, they're that. And of course they know that because they never expect Americans to, travel and actually find out other things that are outside of America. Gee, I never thought that they would ever discover our scheme and how we were offering a cheap economy car from Europe as a Cadillac here in America. They were better off as badging it as a Pontiac or something. They probably would have made more money if they badged it as a Pontiac, but nope, no. They badged it as a Cadillac. Just to get people who were obsessed with brand image to buy a cheap Cadillac. How many Cateras do you see on the road today? I have not seen a Catera, oh my goodness, in probably over a year. in the wild on the roads. Unless I was looking for a Catara online, I haven't seen one. Because they didn't sell well. People knew they were counterfeit Cadillacs. People knew they weren't a real Cadillac because they didn't even look like a Cadillac. But the people who bought them were the same people who buy A-classes today, obsessed with brand image. It's the same foolishness, vicious cycle over and over and over again. You've heard about the Mercedes-Benz CLA class. You've heard about the Mercedes-Benz A-Class. Basically, cheap Mercedes-Benz that ain't worth a dime, but they're going to charge you the same amount that they would for an average new car because it's a Mercedes-Benz, and they can because it has the badge, blah, 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 nah, nah, nah. That's the same foolishness over and over and over again. But what I really want to get to, and I actually haven't mentioned this yet, is, oh my goodness, any Maserati that you get today, oh my goodness. Maserati, at once, dare I say, used to be on par with Aston Martin. Grand touring, high performance, Italian luxury sports cars. Same thing as the Aston Martin is a grand touring, high performance, British luxury sports car. This used to be like the Italian version of that mentality. Grand Tours. You had the Maserati Quattroporte, the Maserati Ghibli, the Maserati, other cars from years past that were rare. Granted, they were never reliable. They were never great cars because they're Italian. Live fast, die young, leave a sexy corpse. You've heard the spiel. However, think of it. Maserati is no longer like that. I live in Southwest Florida. I've grown up in Southwest Florida. Downtown Naples, where some celebrities, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, has a house in Port Royal, is an hour away from where I live. I go there on a fairly regular basis. You can see a Maserati pull up to your local middle school and pick up a child. It's not because those people are particularly rich. It's because of how cheap Maserati has become today. It is crazy. I'm talking about, luxury car companies that have offered cheaper cars, but they haven't gotten rid of their expensive cars. They're just offering cheaper cars. We're talking about a company that has cheapened its entire brand image. You can now get a lease deal on a Maserati Levante SUV. The fact that Maserati is making SUVs is absolutely ludicrous. It's like, what? Why are you making an SUV? You know why? Because they're trying to stay relevant and they're trying to appeal to the mainstream market. And that's crazy. Honestly, I am at a loss for words. You all thought I was getting fired up over the Mercedes-Benz A-Class, but any Maserati that you buy today, and the reason why this has happened is because Chrysler has merged with all of the Italian brands and tried to get an Italian brand presence here in America. Honey, let me break it to you. Chrysler obviously doesn't get the hint. It didn't work in years past, so just because you slap Chrysler on it, and then try to make it a Fiat Chrysler and then try to put everything under the Fiat Chrysler brand moniker and put it in America doesn't mean it's going to work again. I mean, if you wanted anybody to sell Italian cars in the United States, might as well you had the Italians just come in and sell it themselves than to have it go under the umbrella of Chrysler. Now, because it's under the umbrella of Chrysler, everything has to be cheaper. So Mercedes-Benz, when they merge with Chrysler, Mercedes-Benz experienced a period of cheaper, less built, cars with less build quality to them. Well, you have now the Maserati brand that has become cheap, that has become not serious, that has become, just your regular, it's like a Maserati ain't too far from a Cadillac. I mean, like, Cadillac is great and whatnot, but Cadillac's always been, your American luxury car brand that one day after you've worked hard enough, you could be a middle class and buy a Cadillac. A Maserati used to be like an Aston Martin where you'd never be able to afford a Maserati. So some people be like, well, that's a good thing. They're trying to appeal. But it's not so much a good thing because you're losing the cachet, you're losing the exclusivity that used to be the brand of Maserati. And that's what's sad. That's what's sad. It used to be exclusive. It used to be something special. And now it's just your regular, everyday soccer mom mobile because your soccer mom has a good paying job. She's like a head nurse at a hospital. And, she was able to splurge and get herself a Maserati on a lease deal. She couldn't even buy it, but she could splurge and get it leased. So therefore, she's got a Maserati. But this is not the same animal as the Maseratis of old. Those big, powerful V12 engines that used to belch smoke and that used to take forever to work on because they were so complicated, blah, blah, blah. Those are not the same Maseratis of old. Granted, the Maseratis of today might be better than the Maseratis of old, but they are not as exclusive and they are not as special as they used to be. So we have reached the end of the podcast, basically, but you now know my thoughts on the cheap cars that are coming from luxury brands versus the premium cars that are coming from mainstream brands. So thank you so much for listening to this edition of the GSMC podcast, GSMC Car Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, David Lucy Babel, and thank you for listening. If you liked us, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, listen to our podcast on Spotify. Thank you so much, and have a good night, folks.
You've been listening to the GSMC Car Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type GSMC into your favorite podcast app to find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news. Please subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed today's episode.